What am I saying again?
This is MPW.
MPW.
The podcast.
With your host,
Xylo Aria. Cool.
A podcast about music production
for the everyday musician,
where we learn from experienced studio engineers and each other.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the MPW Podcast. I'm your host, Xylo Aria, and today I am really glad to introduce our guest, Nainita Desai. So Nainita is a film composer and has worked with so many incredible films, including For Sama and Enemy Within, and has won a BAFTA, an Emmy, and also been nominated for an Oscar. So incredible to have you here, Nainita.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show, Xylo. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely. Yeah, so nice to chat to you. And actually, one thing that I didn't mention, which I thought was really interesting as well, you also wrote the theme song for the royal wedding for Meghan and Harry. Is that right?
Yeah, that was a funny little project. I just got a call from the BBC, an email from the BBC one day, actually. Just popped up in my inbox and said, well, this is for the BBC broadcast of the royal wedding. Would you be interested in writing the theme tune? I thought, what? I thought somebody was playing a prank on me because it's so different to what I normally do. So in that regard, you know, I never know what I'm going to be working on from one week to the next. Yeah. And that was just wonderful to work on. I had to get my head round very well. They didn't want royal music. They didn't want a rich classical score or anything that you'd normally expect with something like that. Yeah, they wanted something quite, because Meghan was very different, and they wanted something that kind of literally injected fresh life and blood into the royal family. So so they wanted something quite contemporary, actually. And it was great because it was a short piece of music, just a title theme, but I got to record the BBC concert orchestra. One of the BBC orchestras played all the strings. So I had 50 strings playing away, but I had to do a remote recording session because I was at Cannes Film Festival at the time of the recording session. So I was in my hotel room in Cannes doing a remote session with these 50 string players for the theme tune.
Oh my goodness.
I know it sounds glamorous, but it wasn't. It was, oh my God, I've got this session on, and my orchestrator and was handling the session for me in the studio. So yeah, it was fun and quite intense.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds it. Oh my goodness. And yeah, it's just such a variety. Like you were saying, you've worked on big films, you've worked on TV shows, Netflix shows, and video game music as well, and of course the royal wedding as well. So there really is a big variety in there.
Yeah. I mean,
which is great.
Yeah, I think what keeps me fresh is the variety of work that I do. And as a film composer, a lot of people say to you that you have, like any recording artist or a singer-songwriter, they say you've got to develop your own musical voice and have a particular sound or a style that you work in, that you specialize in. And for me, and that's across the board in film and television music as well. But for me, I think my strength is my diversity, the variety of stuff I do. And over the years, I have found a musical voice, but that is become more and more sort of honed down and developed. But I think it's important for me to learn lots of different styles of music and just immerse myself in so many different genres that I can turn my hand to most things. And it's like, for me, lots of crumbs make a biscuit. That's what's kept me alive. So, one day I'll be writing hip hop and urban grime music, and then the next I'll be doing something really sort of deep and almost classical sounding with the orchestra. And I'm not a trained composer as well. So, but I really I've grown to just use my ears and write orchestral music as well, which I really like.
Amazing. And yeah, that takes us, to the next section that we usually talk about, the background of our guest. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how you got to where you are today. And you said you don't have a composition background, and I think I read somewhere you have a maths background. Is that right? So yeah, do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, so basically, I loved music as a child. I learned the violin and the piano at school, and when I was a teenager, I taught myself the guitar, and I wanted to be Joni Mitchell and Sunita Tikaram and Tracy Chapman and all these great singer-songwriters. And at school, I had my own bands, and so I was always performing. But as a teenager, I really got into the technology, actually. And there was this classic synthesizer in my school music department called, I think it's called an EMS VCS3, which is this legendary vintage synthesizer. And it had a tiny little plastic keyboard, and it had all these little pins that you stuck in and out of it. Like, do you remember Battleship? There's this board game called Battleships, and you stuck these pins in and out.
Yeah,
and it just looked like something really wacky. And so I said to the school department, can I borrow this? And they said, yeah, sure. And I borrowed it for 2 years, took it home, borrowed it for 2 years. No one noticed it was missing. And I just played around with it. And I really got into synthesizers and technology. And I bought myself a little 4-tracker cassette multi-track machine, and I'd just record myself playing guitar and then vocals, and had a drum machine and a synthesizer, and I'd just experiment with recording and recording my own songs and pieces of instrumental music. And so from there, so I became a bit geeky and techie. But then I felt under pressure to sort of peer pressure and social pressure to get myself an education, and because I didn't think that music was a career that I could actually take on, that I could make a living out of music. And I was always writing my own tunes and things, but I didn't really know much about I can be a composer, that I never even allowed myself to dream that. And so I did a degree in mathematics because I happened to be good at numbers at school. And I was one of the few people that enjoyed maths.
Oh, I'm the same. I loved it growing up.
And so I did that. And then I did a postgrad course in music technology at the time. And then what happened was, and I really liked sound as well. I was into sound recording, and just I loved film, and I did courses in photography and short filmmaking courses, and I just loved music and film. And so I ended up being a sound designer on feature films, doing all the things like footsteps, Foleys, dialogue editing, sound effects, all the, when you're watching a film or a TV program, there's what are called, in television, they're called dubbing editors. So these are people that actually, in audio post-production, there are a team of people on feature films that actually put all the sounds that you hear. Like if you're watching a big Star Wars or sci-fi movie, everything has to be replaced afterwards in post-production, after the film has been filmed on set. So all the sound effects, all the dialogue editing, they have to re-record, it's all got to be done by a team of people. So I did that for a couple of years, working on some really big feature films at Pinewood Film Studios and all the big film studios around London. And I did that, and it was great. I got about as far as I could get, and it was very creative, being a sound designer, creating amazing sort of weird, crazy crashes and bangs and, for monsters sounds and on films. And then it's a whole industry in its own right. And it taught me a lot about how the film industry operates, and how teams of people work and so on. And then I was really missing music. I really wanted to work in the music industry. And so I had met Peter Gabriel. I don't know if you remember Peter Gabriel, who used to be in the band Genesis. And he was a real advocate and champion of world music. And he set up this recording studio complex in the UK called Real World. And he had his own record label called Real World. And he set up WOMAD, these big live concerts of world music. Yeah. So he set that up, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was a real hero of mine. So I wrote him a letter and said, I'd love to. He has one of the best recording studios in the world. It was quite an amazing place, beautiful sort of surroundings and an environment to work in. So I got a job as his assistant music engineer, and I learned music engineering that way, working with some of the world's best record producers and engineers, and I was working with a lot of world music artists. And so world music were really my roots, because I played the sitar and the tablas as I was a child as well, and really immersed myself in world music. And then I met a music supervisor at the studio complex at Real World, and he said, Nainita, I know you want to write music for film and TV, because there's no set path in this industry. You have to forge your own way. And he gave me a break. And so I wrote the music for a TV show called The Lonely Planet, based on the Lonely Planet guidebooks. And then it became Globe Trekker, which became one of the longest running travel shows, sort of off the beaten track travel shows around the world. And so I wrote the music for one of the episodes, and the film company liked what I did. And they offered me another one, and then my network just grew from there. And so
Amazing.
You just have to get work through word of mouth, and of course I'd never written anything to picture. I'd never written music for TV before, and I didn't know how to do it. And I had a little basic home recording setup with a little computer, my Mac computer, and I just taught myself how to do it. It was just staying up all day and all night, and it was a real baptism by fire.
Wow.
And
that's incredible.
And just sort of learning as I went along. So I had a lucky break. In fact, my career has been a series of lucky breaks. I just sort of came from one to another.
I mean, you say that, but I feel like, a lot of people I've spoken to seem to have such different paths to, getting to where they are. But I think the lucky breaks come to people that have that determination to look for them. I think if you don't really have that drive, you might get that break and not even see it. So I think it is, really your drive that's brought that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, one's career is made up of luck, but also there's a lot of hard work, and you have to put yourself out there. Very much, and that's so important in this industry, that it's all about your relationships with people, and networking is so important, and, there's no use being a wonderful composer or a musician or a songwriter or whatever. You could be the next Mariah Carey or Hans Zimmer, but if no one's heard of you and your music, then it's no good to anyone, if you want to make your way in this industry. So yeah, I learned. It took me a while, actually, but I learned about, just because I was very shy. I was always, all I wanted to do was just sort of sit in my studio and play the guitar and play the keyboards and write songs and everything. But at the same time, I wanted. Why I do what I do is because I want to share my music with the world, and I want to, and share, stories, work on lovely projects that can reach an audience and make people feel something, these different emotions, and I get so much satisfaction out of it. So I learned pretty quickly about networking and getting out there and meeting people, and that's a whole other side to what I do as a composer, is that I spent as much time networking and reaching out to people and developing and nurturing relationships as much as I do composing music, which of course is crucial. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, no, good to mention. And yeah, definitely such an important thing that you can kind of ignore a little bit when you're starting out. But yeah, no, thank you for sharing that with us. And it's really, I always love kind of this part and hearing people's journey into where they are today. So that's really great. So we'll get into our topic today, which of course is film composition. So can you please define for us what a film composer does in one sentence, if you can?
Well, one sentence is pretty tough, Xylo. But basically...
That's all right.
So, yeah, it's fine. So basically, as a film composer, I consider myself to be a storyteller, but through music. So when you're experiencing a film, you're being taken on this journey that the film director wants you to go on, whether whatever genre it may be, whether it's a documentary or a fiction film, a horror, a romance, a rom-com, or thriller, or whatever. So I'm also telling the story, but through music. And so a film composer creates the musical score that accompanies the film, which is called the film score, and the composer will write the underscore. It's all the background music that you hear. This is the music that a film's character cannot hear in the film. So it's different from when you're watching a film and you've got music, diegetic music, which is music coming out from a radio or in a restaurant or a supermarket. That music is different to what the film composer will write. So, for example, think of the tense vibrato of the strings when some character is in a horror movie and they're entering the haunted basement, that background music. So the film composer is responsible for every aspect of the original music in the film. So that includes things like maintaining a budget for all aspects of the film's original music. I'll be in charge of hiring the musicians and the team around me, the assistants, the music editors, the orchestrator, the conductor, the recording studios, if depending on the budget, so I'm in charge of that. I'll have meetings with the director of the film or TV show to spot a film, have spotting sessions. So spotting session is where you identify with the director and the editor of the film all the places in the film where there will be music. Okay, so where the music starts, where the music stops, what is the music meant to be doing emotionally. You'll discuss all these things. You'll go through the whole film. I'll also be writing and recording demos to audition various themes for the director to listen to. So I'll be writing. So once the filming is finished, they go into post-production. And post-production is the process where the director and the editor will sit and put all the shots together, all the raw footage and the filming that they've been doing on location. And so that can take anything from about 7 or 8 weeks to, 4 or 5 months on a project. I mean, occasionally it can be much longer if it's a big feature film. So, for example, I worked on For Sama, which was nominated for an Oscar and won BAFTAs this year. And we were editing the film for 18 months. 1.5 years.
Wow.
So,
oh my gosh.
and it was only meant to be 3 months, and it ended up being 18 months. So I was involved in the project for nearly 2 years, actually. So quite a long, that's the longest I've ever experienced. And then so I'm writing music as the editing is going along. The composer has to write the music in rough form and sketches and demos and things. And then once that process is done and the music has been approved, then if there's a budget for live musicians, then I will then record musicians at different points in the process. It's my job to then, so I'm in my studio, I'm having to record musicians, I'm having to program, arrange. I work in Logic Pro on it's my main DAW in my Mac Pro, and mix the music, engineer it, edit it, master it, and then send it off and then the composer's job is to then send all the final finished music off to the dubbing mixer. That's the person who mixes all the music against the sound effects and the dialogue. all the sound in the project, and then they master, and then they mix all that together and create a master, and then it'll be out on air, sent off to master the whole film, and then out in the cinemas or TV or Netflix streaming, whatever. Yeah. So basically, you're in charge of all the original music right from the beginning, right to the end of the project.
Oh, wow. I did not realize that, actually. That's amazing. And seems like it needs so many other skills other than, composition, like project management and so much, budgeting.
Yes. Yeah, there are lots of different areas to cover, and also a lot of politics as well. You're having to deal with teams of people, and so on the big projects, depending on the budget of the project, if it's a big budget, then I'll be employing a small team of people to help me. I'll have an assistant, I'll have an orchestrator to help with the orchestral musicians, a copyist to write out all the musical parts and check all the musical parts for every member of the orchestra. I'll have a conductor, to handle the conducting fight, because I don't conduct myself. Some composers do, but I prefer to be in the booth, in the control room, listening for other things and commenting on the takes and stuff. Recording engineers, but then on most, I have to say a lot of my projects, the majority of my projects, I'll do everything myself. So I'm in my own studio, writing, recording, programming, mixing, engineering, doing everything myself. So you do have to have a broad skill set to work.
Amazing. Yeah. And actually one thing you mentioned there, you said there's a film scorer and you sort of underscore the film. What did you mean by that?
So the music that you're listening to in a film is it's called the background music, but technically we call it the underscore. So all the music that you hear in the background underneath the actors talking and the dialogue. So that's what's called underscore.
And where does the word or film score, is that a separate thing totally?
No, that is the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so you can call it, no one says background music anymore, maybe occasionally, but the underscore or the film score, that's what people, it's the same thing. That's what people mean, I've bought the soundtrack, the original soundtrack. Yeah. So on Apple Music or Spotify, people will go, I bought the soundtrack for The Mandalorian, which is on Disney Plus or Apple or whatever it is. Yeah. So it's the background music.
Right. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, thank you for talking me through that. There's just so much more involved, which is, it's great. It sounds like you would never be, bored of doing the same thing all the time, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And actually one other thing you mentioned of you kind of write the music as you're going or as the film is being edited. I don't know if that's the right term, but
yes.
Is that, so are you making that on your own kind of DAW, and is it after that it's actually, once that's approved, you actually go into the recording of it? So you're producing in a way as well.
Yeah. So, I'll take you through. So in terms of my process, and how it all works and in what order. So basically people will approach me to write the score for the film or TV show, or I might pitch for it. So, if it's a big project, then you'll be asked to, and it's a big budget, then you'll be asked to pitch for the job. And so I might be up against, I did a big series for the BBC a couple of years ago, and I was up against 14 other composers. So what they did was they sent 2 scenes from the project and from the film, and they sent it to all the composers, and we all had to write our own demo for it. And I did mine, and I submitted it, and then I got brought down to the last 4 people. And then I had a big meeting. They interviewed the 4 people that they'd shortlisted. And then I got the job from that. But I also have relationships with filmmakers and who will always come back to me, and that's great because you develop a kind of shorthand and a way of working. They're almost like friends. We know we've worked before, and we all get on really well, and they like my style, and and so we will always I will always work on a filmmaker's projects once a year or once every 2 years. They may make a film and they'll always come back to me. And I get brought on at different stages. So personally, I like to get involved really early on. I like to get brought on board a project really early so I can think about things. So they'll bring me on board even before they've begun filming the project. So as soon as they get the green light, which means the commissioner or the TV broadcaster has approved the project and said, okay, we want to make a show like this, then the film team may call me up and say, oh, Nainita, we've just got this job. Would you be interested in writing the music for it? And so I'll get brought on board early. Quite often it can be quite late as well, which means you have to hit the ground running and you have to work fast as well. So it means that, I'm not under time pressure to that early period is my favorite period because I can come up with ideas and I can come up with a concept for the score. It's like every project is like writing an album, where each album has its own unique sound and vibe. But for me, it's like it's got to fit in with the tone and the mood of the film and the style of the film. And so I'll start writing musical ideas, but I also have to serve the director's vision, because ultimately the director is in charge and it's their creative vision that you're fulfilling, not my own creative ego. So the director is the boss, and that's a big difference between film music and being an artist, creating your own music, because you have to serve the film and what the film's needs are. And so I'll start writing ideas, and then I'll send those. And I'm writing blind, which means I don't get to see any images. I don't get to see the film itself because they're still filming on location, perhaps. So when filming is finished and the editing starts, hopefully I'll have had time to write a body of music. I'll write sort of 10, 15, 20 tracks that I give to the editors, to the editor and the director, and they'll start laying it in as early ideas and sketches as they're putting all the shots and the film together in the edit. I also create a mood board sometimes. If I'm not writing the original music, I'll go through Spotify or Apple, more likely Spotify, and just put together a musical mood board of tracks that I think might be useful for them. And they'll do the same to me. They'll come with their ideas. I'll have my creative ideas. And that's what I love about it. It's a real creative collaboration. So then as the edit is evolving, they'll send me rough sequences, rough scenes of the film. Then I get to see what the film actually looks like. And that's really inspiring as well, because I'm very visually inspired. So I can look at something, I can watch a scene and know exactly what to write, in terms of mood and emotion. Because the most important thing is, how do I want the audience to feel? And the trend these days is to not be too overly emotional with the music. Because if the acting is good enough and the story is strong enough, then you don't need to hammer it out emotionally with the music. You don't need to write if it's a sad scene, you don't have to write big, soppy, sad music to go with it, because that emotion is already there in the scene. So you can be a lot more subtle about it. And that's a thing where you're experimenting a lot and you think, oh, if I add these strings, maybe I should be a little bit more subtle here. And so you're just trying and experimenting with stuff all the time and so I send it off to the director, and the director will feed back and say, oh, it's a bit too much emotion, or it's a little bit too complicated musically. Because with film music, you have to, sometimes less is more. You don't want to write music that is too rich and full and over complex like you would with an album track, because with albums, as an artist, you want people to just listen to your music. But here the music has to support the story and support the actors and the characters on the screen, and not take over too much. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Like if it's a big opening or if it's a big action sequence, you want to really support the characters on the screen and what's happening. So, and then I will, sometimes in my process, I will bring in musicians really early into the studio. So I might have some experimental recording sessions where I'll bring in a guitarist or a cellist perhaps, and I'll just, we'll do sort of like improv session. And so I'll record a whole bunch of stuff, and then I'll create my own little sound library out of those early recording sessions and use those takes and chop things up and edit it all and sort of write with those early musical ideas that I've recorded with other musicians. But a more traditional way of working is that I do all the demos, all the what's called mock-ups. So I'll create everything using sample libraries and electronics and synths in my computer. And then I have to get it past the director and the editor and the producer and all the exec producers as well. So you have a whole team of people in charge of the film listening to your music, giving you feedback. So that can be quite daunting because, you've put your heart and soul into pieces of music, and then they listen to it and they can rip it apart and say, no, this isn't working, So you have to have quite a thick skin in that regard. Mm-hmm. And then, I take on board their feedback. I do changes to the music, and you go backwards and forwards like that, where I'm writing to picture and I'm hitting points. So when, if something's happening on screen, I'll want to hit that point musically. If there's a big action moment, I might want to highlight it with the music so it becomes very big and dramatic, and then drop it right down. So you're really shaping the music depending on what's happening on the screen. And then I'll finalize the music once the picture has been locked, which means they're not editing it anymore. They'll give me the final picture lock. And if I'm lucky, I'll have anything, if it's a fast turnaround show on television, I'll maybe only have about 48 hours or 2 or 3 days to re-edit all the music, make it work to the final pictures, mix all the music for, sort of 30, 40 minutes of music I've got to mix and master and then send off to the client. Or if it's a feature film, I'll then record musicians. So I've got the final picture lock, and then I will finish off doing all my demos and tweaking them. Then I will record with musicians, replacing the samples with real players, like an orchestra or cellist or whatever. And then mix all the live recorded instruments with the samples and electronics.
Yeah.
So
okay, cool.
Yeah, that's generally the process.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Sounds like there are lots of different steps in there. But yeah, it's great going through that. And so the tools that you use during this process, are they similar to what a producer might use, or is there something really specific to composition?
Yeah, I mean, because I'm having to change music a lot and going backwards and forwards, I can't really use hardware so much in terms of outboard hardware EQs and reverbs and things. So over the years, my system has become everything is pretty much in the box. I do have acoustic instruments. I have a room full of acoustic instruments and plucked stringed instruments, and I've got lovely synthesizers and guitar pedals and guitars, all sorts of things like that. But the nerve center of my studio is my Mac Pro. And I use Logic. I mean, it's just a DAW that I've always used for many years now, and I know it well. But you can easily use Cubase, or film composers tend to use Logic or Cubase. And if you're recording live instruments, if you're recording orchestras, you might use Pro Tools in big studios. But I have a lot of SSD drives. I've got huge sound libraries. So I have a lot of hard drive storage on a RAID system and backups and so on for all my sample libraries, which I use. And because I never know, I'm writing across so many different genres, musical genres, I have a huge library of everything from big orchestral sounds to, grooves and beats, and I have in reverbs, my favorite reverbs are exponential audio, but they're plugins. I have loads of plugins and a lot of RAM, 128 gigs of RAM to cope with all the sounds and tracks that I need. I've got surround sound in my studio. That's for when I'm having to mix for feature films theatrically. So I could go somewhere else to mix my scores, but I prefer to do all my mixing. I've got a fairly good home studio, so I prefer to do all my mixing here. And on my big projects, I'll get in a mix engineer to come to my studio for a week, which is really lovely because I get to put my feet up, sit in the back of the studio on the studio couch and watch someone else work. But I get my mixes to about 80% of where I want them to be, and then I'll have a mix engineer come in to sort of give it that polishing tweak and give it that extra gloss. But yeah, I've got Moog synths and Roland synths and Yamahas and sort of old vintage synths and sort of unusual instruments as well. I have instruments that are made for me, which I really enjoy.
Yeah. Such as?
I've got this thing called a hand pan. It's called a Xylo. And I waited 1.5 years waiting for it because there was such a long waiting list for it to be made. It sounds a bit like, it's got such a unique sound. It's like a steel pan, but I sort of hit it. Right. Sometimes you see buskers playing it.
Oh, yes, I've seen them actually. Yeah.
And it's just got this beautiful sort of meditative sound to it. And because I'm sitting in front of a computer all day with my MIDI controller keyboards and, on the computer, I love to pick up a real instrument because it forces me to be creative in a different way. So, my default mode is to sit in front of a keyboard and a computer and to write music. And really, I want to keep myself on my toes creatively, be fresh, with the way I'm producing music. So if I pick up a guitar or if I play on the handpan, which I do, it's like my meditative therapy, my musical therapy is just every time I walk past it, I'll play it for 3 or 4 minutes and it makes me feel better because I'm in connection with something that's organic and almost human-like, and that's it's just a lovely feeling. And I think that's really important for me to be able to pick up an instrument. Though I'm not a great musician, I'm not a great instrumentalist. I can pluck and bang and scrape, instruments to get what I need to get out of it. But it just, I think that's that sort of connection with a piece of wood, beautifully wooden instrument or something is really important. And of course, I used to sing as well as a teenager, so I do sing on my own scores, and I use not in a conventional way, but I use the human voice like an instrument. So I'll sort of do unusual vocals and then I'll mangle it and treat it and put effects on it in the computer. And it's funny because a lot of people, I'm quite shy as a singer, and so when I sort of warp it so much that people go, "Oh, that's you singing," it's really quite funny. They don't realise, but I enjoy that as well, just to give the human touch to my music. So that's it just sort of, I have the kit that most people would have. I use a lot of native instruments gear and contact sampler, contact sound libraries. It's what you do with it. It's about your creativity.
Yeah. No, it's good to know. I mean, I think some people think immediately that people that are doing well have a completely different set of tools. So it's good to know that it's just all the same and it is kind of what you do with it, which is great. Great to hear. So one thing about, how you got to where you were, and even though I know you mentioned you kind of did your first TV show and you didn't really write to videos before then, but do you have some way to practice that you would recommend for people?
Yeah, sort of tips and tricks of how to get started in the industry. Yeah. I mean, it's a very popular field, and there's so many people want to do it now. And so I think one thing that's really important, I mean, there are a variety of things. One thing that I suggest is to watch film and TV. And it sounds so obvious. I know it sounds really obvious, but if you do want to write for film and television or TV commercials or spots or, anything, or even video games, actually watch the stuff, but watch it with a view to listen to the music and see what it's doing. How is it making you feel in terms of emotion and storytelling? Notice where the piece of music starts and where it stops, and, how big is the arrangement? That's really good film school, is to actually watch it. Mm-hmm. And then I will write music, actually set yourself targets. And, there's so many avenues for self-learning now on the internet. You don't have to go to film school. You don't have to have a degree in music. I mean, I don't have a degree in music. I'm pretty self-taught, in that regard. And I mean, I learned through the good old school of hard knocks and sort of just real world experience. And it takes time, it's a lot of time to invest in self-learning. But, when I first started out, I had a lot of periods of time where I wasn't working, and I was, like they say, I was a resting actor. I was a resting composer, and I'd get a job, and then I wouldn't have a job, for I think a month or so. And so I used that time really carefully, where just by learning and teaching myself all the time. So learning the technology, learning how to use my DAW properly, and programming, working with sound libraries and plugins, and learning. So all those technical skills are really important, because they're the same whatever style of music you're writing. And so, learning your craft, programming, mixing, engineering, mastering, create a show reel. Also practice writing music. So say, okay, there's a piece of music. I'm going to write the title theme for a drama show, and I'm going to spend 2 days working on it, because you have to work very fast in this industry. And so set yourself deadlines and practice to that. And also taking yourself out of your comfort zone, write in a style that you've never written in before. I've had to do that often, where I listen to music, I'll listen to my favorite film scores or TV scores, and I'll analyze it, and then I'll break it down into its elements and then reconstruct it. So, what makes that piece of music so successful? Why is it so effective? What is it about it that's working, in terms of musically or in terms of production? Because I was really into production as well when I was growing up. I wanted to be a record producer or an music mix engineer. But, but I think for what I do, it covers all of those different skill sets. So create a show reel. That's what I did. I spent a long time practicing and writing 10 or 12 pieces of music. And then I sent it off I think I sent off my show reel to over 100 companies and people that I found in this directory of all the film and TV companies. And and I think I got a reply from 2 of them. One was a video game company, and another one was a corporate film company making corporate films for Barclays Bank and Sainsbury's supermarket.
Right.
And so that's how I sort of got started, along with the travel show that I wrote. And it's just, and just develop your network. You just build and build and build from that. Well, the other thing is to write music for short films, for film students, because they are the filmmakers of tomorrow. So, and you're all learning as you grow together in your skills. Yeah. You're all learning together. So that can be really great. In fact, the first short film I ever wrote the music for, over 20 years ago, it was actually nominated for an Oscar.
Incredible.
for best short film. Yeah. And
Wow.
I think I did that job for nothing because it was a young filmmaker who was growing, and sent me his film, and I thought he was so talented. I thought I have to write the music for this film, and I did. And it didn't pay me in terms of money, but I really reaped the reward of that, for it to do so well. So you never know where your success or job is going to come from. And I was going to say, in terms of tips and tricks for, there's some great Facebook groups. If you're on Facebook, check out Scorecast. That's a really healthy Facebook group, and you have loads of, and build on your network of get to know other composers and listen in to see what other people are posting about the film music industry, because that can be really helpful and useful as well. So a lot of people talk about technology there and the business side and networking and how to get ahead in the industry. So Scorecast is really great.
Cool. Thank you. Always good to know. And always good to have a bit of a network to, ask some questions to and just feel part of a community. So we've got a couple of questions for you from our audience. So the first one is from Abhishek Dusklight from India. So Abhishek asked, how do you approach tempo? Because it drives him crazy when he's changing BPMs all the time when he's creating a film score.
Tempo is something, when I'm watching a scene, sometimes I'll just have a basic groove, or I'll play a click track, and I'll try and establish what is the tempo for the particular scene that I'm writing for that will work, that will be in sympathy with so if it's an action scene, for example, then I'll want to have a fast tempo. If it's something, there might be something very free and with no tempo, and I'll just play it live, and then I'll create a tempo map afterwards in Logic. But generally a lot of the time, just to keep things simple, I don't change tempo. So, if I'm writing the music for a particular music cue and it lasts 40 seconds, I'll establish the tempo for it, and then I will not change from that. But what I might do to create the perception that the tempo is different, I might play something in half time or in double time. So if I want to increase the pace of something, like I've set a tempo for something, and then halfway through I want to change the tempo, I might actually play in double time. So it's in effect, it's the same tempo, but it just gives the feeling that the piece has gone faster, or half time, the piece is half as fast. And I do that only because I don't do it all the time, but I do it because it's just much more convenient. Because if I'm going to be changing the music, if the editor is changing the scene and they're editing it all the time and they've given it back to you and they've cut out 10 seconds, it means the music's not going to fit anymore. So I want to keep things as simple as possible, to make life easy for myself when I'm having to re-edit the piece. But other times I do change tempo, and I'm in Logic, and it's fairly straightforward in the menu to change, at a certain bar I will change tempo so that I hit certain points in the film, in the scene. But it has to feel natural. It does have to feel natural. So, I do. I have to be dictated by the hit points on the screen.
Right. Oh, yeah. No, that's really useful, I'm sure. And the halftime and the double time is definitely a good trick that I'm sure Abhishek can put into use. So that's great. Thank you. And we have one question from Agnieszka Olek from Ireland. So she asks, do you always record the final music with a real orchestra? And are there any VSDs or synthesizers that you would recommend to get a realistic sound?
Yeah, so with definitely no to the first one. I don't always record the final music with a real orchestra. It all depends on the budget of the show. So I might bring in other musicians. I don't always have orchestras or orchestral instruments. I mean, on even on most of my work, or a lot of my work, I don't have the budget for. I mean, more and more so now, but I don't have the budget for a real orchestra. So what I will do is to fool the audience into thinking that I'm using a real orchestra. So I use orchestral sound libraries, but I also bring in a couple of musicians. I might bring in 2 or 3 musicians, someone who plays the cello, someone who plays the violin, and I'll record them in my own studio. They'll come and I'll do sessions with them, and then I'll blend it. I'll sort of do a hybrid score. I'll blend it with the sample libraries and the samples so that the audience is actually fooled. It's an audio illusion. The audience is fooled into thinking they're listening to a real orchestra or real musicians. So that's a really clever kind of thing to do. And a lot of, you'll be surprised at how many big shows out there are not using real big orchestras at all. Mainly because, a lot of the time you just don't have the time. The schedules that you're given are very tight, and you have to work fast, and you have to produce a lot of music in a very short amount of time to a very high standard. So I'll just bring in a few musicians, and even then, if I don't have the budget for musicians, that's fine. It's amazing what you can do with sound libraries. So I tend to use Spitfire Audio, a very, very really good company. They make great sound libraries right across the board, from big orchestral sound libraries to all sort of experimental sounds and all sorts of other types of sounds. And there are others like 8Dio, a good Sound Iron. Orchestral Tools make great sample libraries for the orchestra. Cine Samples, they're a very established company as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that, Nainita. And it's been so lovely chatting to you. And like I said before, there's lots that I've learnt from this, and I'm sure there is a lot that people will take away. So is there much else that you have on today? I'm actually just starting to write the music for some video games. So I'm prepping for that, which is a different sort of technical challenge, which is really interesting. And I'm working on a few TV shows at the moment. I'm doing a Netflix series at the moment, which is a big true crime thing. And a busy, fun musical day ahead of me today. Awesome. Okay, cool. Sounds lovely. All right. Well, I will let you get back to that. And thank you so much again. And I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you. It's been lovely to speak to you, Xylo. Thanks for inviting me onto your show.
Pleasure.